Hi everybody, it's Mr. Boll here, and this is our Year 5 history topic, the impact of war. In this lesson, this is lesson 6, which war had more impact on children? Was it World War I or World War II? In a previous lesson, we saw that there were more casualties in World War I, in fact by quite a high amount, and we also saw that there were differences in the way that the war affected the different branches of the services. For example, in World War II, there were more casualties in the Air Force, and then we discussed why that would be. So today we're looking at the impact on children. This first photograph you can see here is a photograph from World War I, and this one is from World War II, which we've seen before. So in the last couple of weeks, we've looked at the Blitz in World War II, and we've looked at evacuation in World War II. And so we know a fair bit about how the war affected children in World War II. So today we're going to do a little bit of source work, historian work on World War I and children in that war. And then we're going to spend the second part of the lesson comparing the two. Okay, so here's the first source from World War I. Okay, here we are. Now, at the moment, I'm not going to say too much about it, but here it's clearly a poster. And you're going to be given 6, I think it is, it might be 7 sources to look at from World War I, and you're going to consider how they affect children. And this is the first one. So now what you're going to do is you're going to make a little table. I'm just going to show you how that would be. So you're going to make a table like this, okay, and on your table you're going to get, when you see each source for the first time, you're going to write down your first ideas, just anything that you think of that you can notice. Try and use your observation skills that we've discussed before. And then I'm going to go through the sources again after that, and then you're going to write anything extra in your further notes. Okay, so remember this bit, I like hearing what your first ideas are, because I think you're very good at observing things. And this is a good skill to practice. Okay, so do that bit before we go through the sources together. So let's take source A. This is source A. So your first ideas, have a good look. What do you think's going on? Well, you've probably noticed this massive Navy ship in here. And it's got a slogan, save the wheat and help the fleet. And here it is, pretty simple, eat less bread. So you're going to be thinking about, well, why would the government pay money for somebody to make a poster like this and probably paste it up all over the place at bus stops and around in offices and factories? Why would they do that? What's going on? Why do people in World War I, including children, need to eat less bread? And so when you've made your little table then, so in a minute I'll ask you to pause the video and just quickly get a piece of paper and make a table like this. Okay, and then you can carry on with the video. But here's what your first ideas might look like when you've seen source A. So you might write down something like, it looks like a poster to get people to eat less bread. They must have been short of food in World War I as well. Now, I mean because as well as World War II, because we know about rationing in World War II. We know times were hard and food was short. So this is the first time we've heard about food being short in World War I. So we're making some notes in there. So you're going to pause the video, then you're going to come back to this bit, and you're going to then fill in this column of your first ideas for all the other sources. Okay, so pause the video for a minute while you just make a quick table. Okay, well done. So you've made your table. You've done the first answer roughly like this about the first source. Now we're going to look at source B. Source B. So you write down your ideas. This is World War I. These are children, older girls, aren't they? They're probably about 15, 16. And you're going to just have a look at that and write down what you think. Pause the video if you need to. Okay. Source C. Again, this is in World War I. Loads and loads of children in this room. What are they doing? Again, you can pause the video if you need to, if I'm going too fast. Source D. Now, I'll let you have a look at this. This is a letter to the boss of the whole war, Lord Kitchener. He's actually spelt his name wrong, so that's maybe not a brilliant start. But Lord Kitchener, the one in the poster, who's pointing at you saying your country needs you. And this is a letter from a boy. He says he's 9 years old. Now, it's got a few spelling mistakes, so it's not quite as good at spelling as you are. So I'm going to give to you the typed up version, okay, so that you can have a look at that. All right, so you pause the video if you need to, have a good read of that, and then write some ideas on the first column of your table. Okay, so we're moving on to source E. Again, this is World War One, and these are boys, maybe 15, 16 again. And what are they doing? Source F. Okay, and this is the last one. Source G. Again, remember this is World War One, and that, just so you know, is a German Zeppelin, an airship. Okay, now what I'm going to do is going to go back to the beginning. So we're just going back. Now I'm assuming that you've now filled in everything on this column, your first ideas. So if you haven't, then you want to pause and do that before we do the next bit. So you've got some ideas for each picture, having a guess of what is going on. So let's go back one. Okay, this is a poster. It's very important in World War One that the supplies were running out because some ships bringing in food from other countries were being sunk by enemy ships, enemy submarines mostly, U-boats, and so there wasn't enough much food to go around. But something that you need to know to help you compare this on the impact on children is that rationing in World War One wasn't introduced until 1918. Now, who can remember the years that World War One took place? Call them out. Okay, so I expect you got that right. It was 1914 to 1918. So rationing was only introduced right at the end of the war. Okay, and so that might make you think that maybe the food shortages weren't quite so bad, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. So that's source A. Okay. And we've got our first ideas. Now we're looking at each source and getting a little bit more information. And if there's anything that I say that you haven't thought of, you can write it in your second column, which is for further notes. Okay? So these girls, what are they holding? Well, these are all vegetables like cauliflowers or possibly cabbages. And they are working on a farm. You've probably got a clue here because she's got a pitchfork. And they're helping to produce more food, again, because Britain is in short supply of food. So people helped out in World War One, like we've discussed before about people helping out in World War Two, and so children had to help out. However, this wasn't every person, okay? So every single child wasn't doing jobs like this. Now, this one was quite difficult. So what's going on here? Well, actually, it would be hard to guess this, but these are all children and they are queuing up to give their pocket money to a war charity to raise money for the soldiers. So that's very nice of them, isn't it? They probably didn't get much pocket money either. Probably they would have got less than a shilling, which is worth in our money less than 5 pence. But of course, in those days, you could get a bit more with 5 pence than you can now. But they're queuing up to give their pocket money because they want to help the war effort, which is really nice of them. Another thing you probably need to know is that quite a lot of boys, even if they were only 15, 16, would go along to the army recruiting office to volunteer to be in the army. And then the army people would say, "How old are you?" And they'd say, "I'm 18." And they would let them in. So people did volunteer and give generously, and some of those boys who joined the army, unfortunately, ended up being one of the casualties. But here they are queuing up to give their pocket money. Now this letter, so what he's saying is, this boy is called Alfie, and he says, I want to go to the front line and fight the Germans, okay? And you'll see at the top, he's only 9, and he can ride jolly quick on his bicycle, he says, and he could send messages, and he wouldn't let the Germans get his bike, and he would be able to shoot them. I don't think Lord Kitchener would have let him join the army at the age of 9, but it shows people wanted to help, doesn't it? Okay, source E. Now these lads are working, and you probably said, oh, I think they're working in some sort of a factory. Yeah, they are. They're helping to make aircraft. Okay, so they're quite young. So like the girls working on the farm, they're doing something to help the war effort. Okay, so that's still World War One. In this one, you might have thought, well, hasn't got any children in it, but as it has, see, this is a Boy Scout. And he is in helping with the war effort by giving messages. Okay, so they didn't actually go to the front line, but they did help in the war effort and do various things like guarding the bridge where important trains would go through and things like that. Okay, so Boy Scouts and Girl Guides were involved in the war effort in World War One, but not in a dangerous way. And this one, you might have been surprised by this. This is London. And it's in World War One, and this is a German Zeppelin because they invented this. So nowadays you wouldn't use it in a war. You just have it. You sometimes see them flying overhead with an advert, like there's a famous one for Goodyear tyres that you sometimes see. But in those days, in the war, there were quite a few air raids, and they did bomb London. But there were only 51 air raids on Britain during the whole of World War One, and that's a lot less than in World War Two. Alright, so when you're considering which war had the biggest impact on children, just bear that in mind as well. Okay, so here's your sheet then that you've made. This is task number 1, your table. You've already filled in the first column, and then after that little section where I went through the sources with you, you can write a couple of extra things in here. This is the sort of thing you might get. There's your first column, and that's what you might write in your second column, further notes. Is that they were short of food because supply ships were being sunk, but rationing wasn't introduced until 1918, which is nearly the end of the war. So if you need to, just pause the video and finish off your table, and then we'll move on to the second half of the lesson. Okay? Right. So you finished your table, off we go. Now we're going to look at some sources from World War II now, and you've seen these before, most of them. So you don't need me to go through them with you. We're going to compare World War One, which is the new information for today, with these pictures from World War Two. Okay, so here are some children. We decided that they're probably watching a fight between British and German planes that's happening in the sky. That's quite dangerous where they are. And here, the children we saw a couple of weeks ago, whom looks like their house has been blown up, and we don't know if their parents are still alive. This young lad is putting on his gas mask. All children had to have a gas mask. They all had to carry it with them all the time during the whole of the war, and they had to be ready to put it on. And as I told you before, my dad's school in assembly, so there's about 1,000 people, they could all have their gas mask on in less than a minute. And here is, along with everybody else, this little girl is going down into this Anderson shelter to shelter from the bombs. These children are being evacuated. You can tell by their identity tag. We discussed that last week. They look quite sad and worried and upset. But evacuation wasn't always bad. Sometimes people found it quite fun, and these lads are having a good time. They didn't often get to have a bath where they might have come from, and where they've gone to, it's actually a little bit nicer and a bit cleaner. Now, finally, these are the rations, which we looked at before when we looked at VE Day. These are the rations for a whole week. Okay, so this you could get other things. Obviously, if you grew your own vegetables, you can eat as much of them as you want, and you could get bread in World War II, but you could only have one egg every week, one bit of bacon, a couple of sausages. This is a little bit of cheese and some butter. This is liver. Okay, and this is a bit of black pudding. And well, I think I've mentioned before that although nowadays children often say, I don't like liver, in the war, people were glad to have it because they didn't have much else. Right, so rationing. Now, when you're comparing World War One with World War Two, a few things stand out straight away. They both had rationing, but which war was more serious? Which war had the more serious rationing? Which one? In World War II, they started rationing straight away at the beginning of the war, whereas in World War One, didn't start till later. There wasn't any evacuation in World War One, so you might think about that. There weren't any gas masks in World War One. There weren't any air raid shelters in World War One. There was some air raids in World War One, but not many, and there were some deaths caused, but much fewer than in World War Two. Okay, so when you're considering, and that's the second task for today, is for us to look at, is for you to write a little bit, which one do you think was more serious, World War One or World War Two, in terms of the impact on children? Okay, so the first paragraph is going to be your opinion. You're going to say, I think, la la la, because. Okay, so you have to give me some reasons for your opinion. Here's a waggle that I've done. So mine says, I think World War II had more impact on children because although there were air raids in World War One, there were only 51 air raids on Britain in World War One compared with hundreds in World War Two. In World War Two, every child was affected, not just a few. Children had to wear gas masks, go into underground shelters, and even be evacuated from World War Two, whereas in World War One, they stayed at home. Now, I want you to notice some useful words that you're going to find very helpful for this type of writing. And this is brilliant, obviously, for English as well as for history. Here are two words, although. That was useful when I was writing my paragraph. I might want to think about how you could use words like although and whereas. And that helps you to compare things. Yep, comparing one. Now, the second paragraph, you're going to choose two of the sources. So you have to choose one from the section between A and G. That's all the World War One sources. And then you choose one from the World War Two sources, and you're going to choose them to back up your opinion. Okay, so here's my waggle to show you what I've done. The two sources I'm choosing to compare are E, which is the one with the older boys helping making aircraft in World War One. I think they would have enjoyed this. But source K from World War II shows young children being scared because they have to be evacuated. You can choose any two that you like, okay? But when you're writing about them, you need to say why you're choosing them, and I would like you to link this with your first paragraph. So whatever you say here, you're going to choose two sources that back up your opinion, okay? And that's an important skill in history. Right, well done. So just a reminder that task number one is this table. Take a photograph of that when you finished it and send it to me. Okay. And task number two, you're going to write me an answer to this question with two paragraphs. One is your opinion and why do you think so? You don't have to agree with me. And number two is you choose two sources to back up your opinion. All right. So good luck and I'll see you soon. All the best.